My first inspiration, I was 3 years old. I climbed out of my crib and I drew all over the bedroom wall with crayons. My very first memory ever, I had fallen in love with making lines. The next main thing, I was visiting my grandparents in Florence, South Carolina. My grandmother had a beautiful, beautiful flower garden, and she gave me, at the age of maybe 4 or 5, a handful of beans and a handful of corns, and told me that I could plant them anywhere I wanted. And back in those days, you always spent at least a few weeks places, so she knew that they would have a chance to come up and sprout. And so if you see my work, you see the evidence of growth and sprouting in almost everything. And so it had a tremendous impact on me. The other thing that I was so fond of as a child was just spending as much of the day and the weekends in the woods with my little dog, Susie. We wore matching red jackets, by the way. And I collected everything you can imagine, especially snails and rocks and all sorts of wonderful things that my mother appreciated. But it was those collection of things that, until recently, I can still find many of those things. And all of those things become memory pieces. And all of that became part of my art, where creating, whether it's a painting, whether it's a drawing, it takes me right back to that place. It just creates an instant memory for me. So it started in the woods with Susie. All the way through school, I did mostly drawing, and at the University of Michigan, I decided to start a degree in painting. And I loved sculpture as well, but I didn't want to have to deal with all of that heavy equipment. You know, I was kind of small and I wanted to be independent and be able to move my work around. It was when I was graduating with a master's degree that one of my fellow students had gone off to study raku in Japan and come back with these amazing pieces of sculpture. I started with raku. I mean, how bright can you get, you know? So it was extremely bright colors and black and white, you know. And then eventually I started doing primitive firings, which were very soft and very Zen-like in form and in color. And I loved those. And then one day I did a white piece, and I could not make myself put it in the primitive firing, and I kept it for months. Finally, one day I said, why does it have to be fired at all? I think I like it white. So that's where all the white came from. And then I would come back, you know, to some color, and then eventually go back to white, you know, and kind of bounce back and forth. When I see a painting, you know, I look at it and I don't feel normally like running up to touch it, you know. So there's that distance there. But with the clay pieces, you almost have to remind people, no, I'm sorry, but you can't touch that, you know. But that's part of what I love to incorporate in the form itself, is something that makes it almost imperative, you know, that you have the need to go and feel the form. Dreams have been a tremendous influence on my work, especially in more recent years. And a lot of quotes that we've used around here have come directly, you know, from dreams. All of these have become ideas behind a lot of my work. Garden elements and forests and things were also a big part of my dreams. And I'm sort of known for having a very green thumb and a close connection with plants. So I started using my knowledge of gardening and combined that with the piece behind me, which is called A Walk Remembered. The very first piece that I always use as sort of the introduction to Walk Remembered is a long, looks like a long white kind of a boat, and it is actually a giant tulip petal. And that represents my beginnings. It represents my mother and father's relationship. And how when we lived in Paris, my poor Southern mother had never been out of the South. And my father would bring her armloads of tulips to make her happy. And so those tulips that he would give her represent my mother and their romantic relationship and resulting in me. So each one of those has a story. My philosophy for life, it's all about the spiral, and it's represented in a very tiny little moon shell. It's that spiral. I used to think life was maybe like a circle or something, but it's really not. It's really a spiral where you're surprised, especially when you get to be my age. You really are amazed at how many times you come back to places and peoples and events that have been very important to you, but it's at a different point in time. Now, whether it goes down or up, I'm not sure, but I'm sure life is a spiral. Chaos has a way of pushing you toward harmony. So that's the way it is when I work. I just start working, and I don't always know where I'm going with it. I am following something inside of me that tells me where to go. Sometimes it's the wrong thing to do, and you have to turn around and you have to change it. Sometimes you have to do that many times, and it's very chaotic. But eventually, harmony comes through. The most meaningful of the series that I've done was many years ago in 1983, and my husband was killed, Ryan's father, in a plane accident, and he was not quite 9 years old. I spent quite a few years, in therapy and everything, trying to work through all of that. And 9/11 happens. I'm teaching my 6th grade, and it's like our whole lives, changed. But for me, I could not help but have empathy like few people for what had happened to all those thousands of people, really, in New York and other places where the planes had killed so many people. And I was feeling nothing but blackness. And I remember going to sleep at night and feeling scared, And then all of a sudden, I started working in my studio because I started seeing all of these black, dark, burned forests. But being a gardener and loving nature, I found even in my own garden that many times when things are mutilated, they come back bigger and stronger. And so all of a sudden, there I was. I could see hope and optimism. And so I started this series of 10 trees. And the very first one, it's mostly black and blue, and then there's just a little bit of a white tip coming out the top. And so it's one branch coming back to life. As time went, each one of the tree totems showed more growth and more resilience. And the final one has leaves all over it. And then the leaves have just come out of the most unlikely places. And I realized that all of those were portraits of me. When I first started painting, my paintings were very bright. You're young, you're inexperienced, and I didn't know what subtlety was then. Things were very bright. And then all of a sudden, I started painting with almost all black. My next, probably one of my best series, but I hardly have any left, were the apple orchards of Michigan, very abstract. And at one point, one of my instructors at the University of Michigan, a woman, told me I'd never be a painter, that I'd be a great illustrator because I could draw so well. And of course, I went right out the door and immediately decided if I didn't do anything else, I was going to be a wonderful painter. And I did do, I think, one of the best series that I've ever done. She made the other terrible mistake of saying my work was too feminine. So my other thing that I was going to swear to do was to make the most feminine artwork I could ever make. So it was all like pale greens and pale blues and, kind of pinks and, very feminine, very abstract. But I still think they're some of the best things I've ever done. My dreams took me to Indiana Fulbright and to study an entire summer of ceramics in China and all of that. And I fell in love with the I Ching teapots. What they do is just so magnificent. I started my own, sort of version of nature in the I Ching teapots. In China, the rock represents the man and the orchid is the woman. But I loved that idea. And so beyond the teapots and all of the intricacy of the work of making something so small, there's a flower on a rock. It's supposed to be a dancing flower on this rock. It's very fragile, and the rock is very kind of heavy looking. It's so delicate, it looks like it should break. Just like, the idea of yin and yang and some of the concepts that I learned and loved, while I was in Asia. Picasso, of all people, talked about how art, for an artist, it's a gift that comes from somewhere. We don't know. It's almost, it comes through you, and it's a gift to you. But it is also a gift that once you have it, that you give it to others. And that could mean the piece. It could mean the gift of learning to work and make art yourself. But I'm finding my work can go on teaching, for me. And so that's very special. My life's work has been centered around observing and interpreting our natural world and its abundant life forms into transcendent sculptural statements as a continuing reminder of the deep interconnectedness and inherent strength of all things. It is my deepest desire that those who connect with my work can share in the calming, grounded narratives that reveal themselves to me during the creative process. Healer Be Healed has become a mantra for me as a reminder of how our eternal stories of struggle, growth, renewal, and hope continue to connect each of us to ourselves, one another, and our very wise and wondrously brave natural world.